Welcome, Sian Podmore, to Perfect Health on Elastic FM with Elaine Godley. Lovely to have you on the show this afternoon.
I'm very pleased to be here and very happy to meet you, Elaine.
I'd like to talk about your horrendous story with your pregnancy. You had a bit of a tough time, didn't you?
Yes, it was my third pregnancy, and a few months in, about 3 or 4 months in, I was beginning to find it very difficult to move, to walk, swim, that sort of thing. And I went to see a physiotherapist for an unrelated issue, just something very minor. And I mentioned this pain and difficulty to her, and she said, "How did you get here?" And I said, "Well, I walked." And she said, "Don't walk home."
Goodness.
And she told me about the condition and its prognosis. Basically, when you're pregnant, you produce a hormone that allows the ligaments around your pelvis to soften so you can get the baby through when you give birth. And my hormones have been a little bit over enthusiastic. And the gap was getting a little too wide, which causes pain and difficulty with walking. So about a month later, I was on crutches, and a month after that, I needed a wheelchair. And I spent quite a lot of time in and out of hospital, just because it was just so difficult to move and so painful.
What's the condition called, Sian?
It's called Symphisis Pubis Dysfunction. I had it to quite a serious degree. A lot of women do experience it to a minor extent, getting backache and a little sort of hip pain and things, but a few develop it to a point where it's very uncomfortable and can make it difficult for them to walk.
Goodness, I've never heard of it. So, I suppose I did know about the softening of the pelvic area, but I hadn't really given it any thought. But certainly had no idea there was a condition that could be brought on by hormonal changes.
Yeah, I mean, and it can be quite serious. In very rare cases, I was one of the unlucky ones there. When I'd had the baby afterwards, my lovely daughter, they found out that one half of my pelvis had twisted a little against the other. So I didn't really recover as most women would. After about sort of 4 to 6 months, most women will recover. But I was left with this distortion, which over the years caused knock-on effects up my spine. And I was in a wheelchair.
How long were you in a wheelchair for?
I actually needed to use a wheelchair for something like 18 and a half years.
Oh my word, goodness.
And nobody actually expected me to recover.
Wow.
I'd looked into surgery, I'd been to London to see specialists, I'd been through physios and all sorts of treatments, and nothing seemed to alleviate it. And of course, being in a wheelchair, which isn't very good for your posture, there's a lot of jolting on your spine, all sorts of things. It was other problems were developing as well.
So your daughter then didn't know you anything other than in a wheelchair?
No.
For the first 18 and a half years?
No. And then after about 9 or 10 years, I developed ME quite seriously as well.
Is that connected?
I think it was, to a large extent, being in so much pain all the time, the difficulty of living as a disabled person, and all the medication that I was having to take, having 3 children. I didn't want the disability to limit me. I felt it was important to show my children that disability need not be the end of your lives. So I was doing a fine arts degree and trying to exhibit work and start to sell it and everything as well. And it just all proved too much. And my system collapsed with ME as well. So that sort of finished everything off really for me. I couldn't do anything else from that point.
Crikey, well, that's testament to you being a tough cookie. 3 children in a wheelchair and doing a fine art degree. Goodness me.
Yeah, looking back on it, it was a bit mad actually, and the children were home educated as well.
Oh, for crying out loud! Dear Lord, you bring it on in spades, you do, don't you?
Yeah, I really did. Mind you, home educating's a lot of fun. Well, it was for us anyway.
Okay, so and your poor husband dealing with all of this as well, because it's people don't realise it's not just the person with a disability; it's everybody in the immediate family and friends, and it has a ripple effect, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, he pretty much had to give up his work as a guitar teacher. You know, there was the concerns of my own family and his family who were trying to support us as well. And yeah, it was difficult, very difficult for people, for everybody.
So we're on the radio, although an element of this will be on YouTube. But for the radio listeners, they won't know that I can see you, and I saw you before we started recording, walking around the room there where we're doing the interview. So tell me how you got from being in a wheelchair for 18 and a half years to walking about.
Well, that's the very strange part, and I do not have a full explanation for this. Because I'd lost everything, I became very depressed. When I developed the ME, that was it. You know, I had nothing left at that point. I was introduced to basic relaxation meditations, which I found helped the ME symptoms a little bit. So I wanted to go into meditation deeper to see if it would help me more, which took me to the doorstep of a Buddhist centre, where I kind of fell over and became a Buddhist, because it worked, it helped, and with difficulty over a very, very long time. I dealt with some of my, shall we say, psychological issues around being a disabled person, and issues from my past as well that were causing me to actually be quite an angry, bitter sort of person, really quite resentful and self-pitying. And I came to a point where I realised that this work that was making me a much nicer person to be around, much more considerate and compassionate towards myself and other people, was much more important than the state of my body. And that brought me to a certain peace. And I used to go on retreats quite a lot because, I mean, they were very good for my health. They gave my husband and my family a break from having to care for me. And they were always in very peaceful situations, where I was actually very happy.
So you were still in a wheelchair at this stage?
Yeah, I was still in a wheelchair.
How many years ago was this, Sian?
This has been going on for something like 7 years. I've been going. And then I went on a particular retreat. There was nothing special about the retreat. There was nothing different in the way that I was when I got there. But it's, you would sit in meditation every morning just to bring yourself into the day. And so I sat in this perfectly normal meditation. And during the meditation, I had an insight, a breakthrough into some personal issues. This was accompanied by a great release and uprush of energy, a kind of catharsis. There's nothing unusual about this. People have these experiences in meditation all the time, and I'd already had quite a lot of them. You know, big shifts in the way that in your perspective on various things. But I did feel a very big release of emotional energy. And when I stood up, my back would straighten out for the first time in 18 and a half years.
Good grief.
So I don't know what it was, but something released in my back and I stood straight. And the pain was gone and I was able to move. And I wanted to run and to dance. You know, just this enormous explosion of energy in me. So I very, very quietly and calmly walked out of the room with everybody else. Actually, I think I just waited until everybody else had gone and then walked out of the room because I wasn't sure how I could walk.
Leaving your wheelchair behind you.
And there's a few trees around the place where I was staying, and I went and I ran and I danced
Wow.
in the trees where nobody could see me. And I thought, oh, you know, what is going to happen here? I thought, you know, you can imagine, really. I just didn't know what was going to happen. I'm going to pay for this, or am I? Is it real? And the strange thing was, it was actually a silent retreat. So for the next 10 days, I couldn't actually tell anybody what was going on. I did have a mentor that I saw, you know, every other day just for a few minutes and could just mention something. But in a way, it was a good thing because I could take myself off on my own and just process what was happening. And the pain had gone. I could stop taking the pills. When I stopped taking the pills and I was out of pain, the ME symptoms rapidly cleared. I didn't stop moving for 4 days and nights. I was even going out for walks during the night because I just couldn't stop.
Remarkable.
And it was absolutely fabulous. Yeah.
So when you were going to your daily meditation in this Buddhist centre, were you still going with your wheelchair, you know, to support you, or were you walking in there, or what happened?
Well, I wasn't confined to a wheelchair. I wasn't confined to one. I could generally walk a short distance. You know, I had the wheelchair, you know, for longer distances, right, and, you know, for when I got tired. But the retreat centre isn't very big, so I could just about make it from my room to the meditation room.
Right, okay.
And take a rest and go back again. So in a very small environment, I could just about manage. So walking a little bit wasn't strange, but walking straight up and not having a sort of ape-like gait was actually quite was weird. And being the right height was weird.
And so when was this, Sian?
This was back in 2013, late 2013, nearly 5 years ago now.
So how have the changes affected your life? That must be quite remarkable.
Well, absolutely enormous, a complete change of life. The person that came out of that experience is not the same person who went into it. So on a lot of ways, I didn't know who I was. The world looked strange. Distances look strange. Heights look strange. I had to re-enter the world in a completely different way. You know, I wasn't this dependent person, you know, whose major trauma in life was trying to deal with the benefits agency. Suddenly I had to have a real life again, and I had the energy to be with people again. 9 months after I recovered, my husband and I, we went to Snowdonia and I climbed Snowdon. Not by the easiest route. Just a few weeks ago, well, actually, last week, I was in the Alps, the French Alps, and I climbed a mountain called La Tournette, which is over 2,000 metres high. It's twice the height of Snowdon.
Gracious me.
And I still can't believe I'm doing this.
Your husband's got a new wife. Your children have got a new mother.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they don't know what hit them either. They really don't.
So you said at the beginning that you don't have a full explanation, but what do you think happened? How did the release happen?
Yeah, I've studied the work of somebody called Reginald Ray quite a lot, and worked with somebody called Vidyamala Birch who developed the Breathworks method and organisation, if any of your listeners have heard of that.
Yes.
And really what they say is that all the traumas that we experience in life but don't have the opportunity to process properly are held within the body.
Indeed they are.
And can be held to the extent of causing physical and psychological illness and even disability.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, I mean, I had that, but I also didn't have a very easy beginning in life anyway. So I've always had kind of emotional, psychological issues that have made life quite difficult at times, and they've never been resolved properly. And I think through my practices of Buddhism, where I was learning to deal with basically the monsters and demons that lived inside me, got to the point where I could learn to accept them and work with them, and actually give them the love and self-care that was needed. And through doing that, it came to a point where things released enough to restore my health to me, my physical health. So I think a lot of what kept me bound into physical sickness, as it were, and disability had a lot to do with unprocessed traumas.
That is so true, Sian. I know that to be true. People that I support through cancer and getting them back to wellness, the key thing that holds them back from the recovery is emotional. And they can sling all sorts of things at their body, but if they don't heal the emotional side of things, they do not heal well. Some of them don't heal at all, and some of them will struggle, but they will eventually get there. So you were saying that earlier on that you had your meditation practice and you'd often had these sort of insights and sort of releases. So that sounds to me like you were going down the onion layers, as we call it, sort of each kind of a release that you had maybe went down to the next layer till you got to the real nub of whatever the problem was, and then that was the thing that unlocked. Is that a fair assessment?
I think yes, that's a fair assessment. And being away from my normal environment, but still in a very safe environment for 10 days, 2 weeks or more at a time, gave me the time and the space and the conditions and support to actually allow those things to open up.
I think that's another really good point, because you can't heal if you're doing the same things day in, day out. You have to do something different. And the number of people that I've met who can't bring themselves to kind of step outside of their environment, so they're in the same old swirl the whole time and they're expecting to get better, and some of them don't even change their daily practices of any description, and then they wonder why they don't recover. So you're a living, breathing example of somebody who you took yourself out of your environment and went to peace, did meditation, and do you still continue with the Buddhist thing?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I wouldn't be without it. But something I'd like to add, Elaine, when that physio said, "Don't walk home again," and told me why, obviously I wanted to cry. I wanted to be emotional. You know, I needed to have an emotional release myself. My husband had picked me up and my 2 older boys were in the car. And as I started to cry, they became upset. So I shut down my own emotional reactions.
Right.
And this is what we do in our own home environment with our work. We haven't got the space and time that we need to work on these traumas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Experience them.
Yeah, we kind of say to ourselves, yes, on an intellectual level that we've dealt with stuff, but actually the body has a different view, doesn't it?
Well, the body only knows reality. The body is reality, and it doesn't give one at all about your ambitions, your plans, or anything, or, you know, what you want to do. The body can only work with what really is. And it will tell you what really is as well. And if you don't listen to it for long enough, then it will just keep shouting louder and louder at you.
Yeah, which is what happened in your case, didn't it? And then it held you back for such a long time, and then gradually you what led you to go to the Buddhist retreat?
I just found retreats so beneficial. I mean, the whole ethos and practice of Buddhism was so beneficial and healing for me personally, and I believe everybody around me in the world in general. So it was just worth doing, and it gave me a purpose as well when there was nothing else, you know, that I could do. you know, obviously I had the children, but there was nothing, it wasn't enough, obviously. We need to have a purpose in life even beyond that. Well, I do anyway.
I think that's true for
I
everybody.
mean,
If you don't have a purpose, well, get out of bed in the morning.
no, well, I couldn't anyway, but it gave me a purpose for why, even being in bed, even being stuck in bed. There was nothing, if there's absolutely nothing else you can do, you could at least work on your mind to be a beneficial influence on what little contact you do have with the world. You
Yeah,
could do that at
absolutely.
least,
Yeah.
and release yourself from your own pain and suffering.
Well, it's a remarkable story. So what do you do day to day now that you've got your life back, Sian?
Right, well, I'm trying to build a life again. I mean, I know this happened several years ago, but I'm still in a rebuilding process. So I took a while out to recover and recuperate and get the hang of having a working body again. And then I had to get a job, obviously, and my confidence was down the plug hole, and thought, well, nobody's going to want me. So I ended up doing care work for quite a few years. But last year I got to the point where that wasn't satisfying. I have this story to tell. Some people would call it a miracle. I'm not too fond of that word. But there's a purpose in that. I can use that to help and benefit and encourage other people. It's bigger than me. I can't just lock myself down into a very small space and a very small life with something like that happening to me. It's something that has to be put out into the world for the benefit of others.
I perfectly agree, and that's part of what we're doing here with this radio interview for you. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I gave up the day job and been doing a bit of sort of freelance PA work and this and that with people who are mentoring and encouraging me to basically be self-employed and find a way of putting this story out there. And I'm in the process now of launching myself as a counsellor, coach, into counselling and coaching kind of work, public speaking, telling the story, and then saying these things can help you. They may well not cure you, but they can help you to live well with what you have.
We have to be very careful with the cure word. We're not allowed to say cure, are we? Even though we have, I cured myself of a kidney condition I was born with when I was, 15 years ago I did that, but we're not allowed, because we're not medics, we're not allowed to say. We have to be very careful of the language that we use.
Well, I wouldn't build up that kind of expectation in anybody anyway. I wouldn't do that to anybody anyway. I was very fortunate that it did cure me. But
absolutely,
if nothing else, it can cure a lot of psychological pain. If nothing else, it can do that.
So what's the magic then? I mean, is it the meditation? Is it taking yourself away for retreats? I know not everybody can afford retreats.
No, I mean, I was very lucky in that I got some funding where I could take respite breaks. To give my family some respite. So I used that to take myself on retreats, and there are retreat centres that will work on a what you're able to give basis, and I was very lucky to be part of a Buddhist movement that has one of those. So I could use that resource, but it's not. I wouldn't put it down to one single thing. I can't put it down to one single thing, and there were other things outside the Buddhism that were helping as well. But it was, there were common themes running through all the helpful things that I was using at the time.
What were some of the helpful things then that were outside of the Buddhism movement?
Working with people who understood the connection between the mind and the body.
Yes.
how trauma is held, people who taught me to self-care as well. I've got a friend who's a very, very good herbal and massage therapist, who's one of the most gentle, loving people I've ever met. You know, she was a tremendous help to me. But it was attracting those very loving, caring people who taught me the need for self-love and self-care, that were also, you know, just invaluable.
So being surrounded by positivity and love.
That's right, yeah. And it can go a huge way. And no matter what your body's doing, no matter what state you're in, that's a very, very healthy place to be.
Indeed. And is your husband back to guitar teaching now?
Well, that's a difficulty. It's been hard for him to pick up again, you know, after he had to pretty much give it all up. Both of us are struggling with the technological changes that have happened in the sort of nearly 20 years, nearly 2 decades of my being ill. We've kind of lost touch with how things have progressed, how people market themselves these days. So it's been quite it's difficult for him to pick up as well. So he's doing a little guitar teaching. He could do with some more. He's padding that out with a bit of care work, which is quite frustrating for him actually, because he's quite, you know, he's pretty talented. But,
perhaps I can help outside of this conversation. We'll have another conversation when we start recording on that side of things.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
So apart from the challenges of sort of being cocooned for 20 years, now sort of coming out of it, life is on the up.
It is, definitely. But I will say one thing, as anybody who's becoming ill will tell you, in my terms, I saw it as a kind of death. It's very difficult. You have to put behind you what you were and relearn how to be someone new. It's kind of death, and then you try to re-become, you can't be reborn and focus on what you can still do. What I found and what really shocked me was the extent to which recovery was also just as difficult. That person, that sick, disabled person then had to, and how that person lived, had to die. And it was just as difficult learning to relive as a fit, healthy human being.
What advice would you give to people who find themselves in that situation, or maybe they're still in the transition? What would you say to them?
Do exactly the same thing as you did when you were becoming ill. Get some help, get some support, talk about it. And it's, you know, do a lot of work on letting go and noticing what you have. Look forward and just let go of what's behind you. But again, you need some support. You need some rehabilitation when you come out again.
When you came off of, because you had the disability living allowance or whatever it was called in those days and so on, was there any government help in order for you to get back slowly to a new life?
There was a transition in the coming off the benefits and going on to working, you know, some working tax credit and things like that. Financially, there was a transition, but I wasn't offered any sort of life rehabilitation at all.
What did your GP say?
His jaw kind of hit the ground. But again, I think one of my little flaws is that I tend to make myself look like I'm doing all right even when I'm not. And obviously I was so elated by my recovery. I was just flying when I recovered. It took me some time to realise that actually it's not that easy coming back into real life again. And I needed some help. So I didn't actually ask for it. And it was, as time has gone on, as I've taken each step into growing, into my growth, into the next stage, I've hit problems again, resistance again, because I don't know how to cope with being a sort of bigger person than I was beforehand. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's many years of living a life that you weren't meant to live. Well, maybe you were meant to live. I mean,
Well, yeah,
things happen for a reason, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. But as you move on each stage and you have to grow again, all of a sudden the same old walls are there, and you hit them again, and you have to work through them again every time you need to grow. And it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, I mean, growing through life is the same for all of us, really, because we all go through different chapters in life, don't we? We go through our teens, our young free and single, and then marriage and children, and then grandparents, and so it goes on. Or living singly, however people live. But every kind of decade, every 10 years, there's a kind of a shift I've found in my life.
Yeah, I've just done it a little more compressed than that in the past few years.
You've got to catch up on, haven't you?
Well, that's it. So I've very quickly gone from almost bed and wheelchair ridden, to recovering, having to have a job, needing to move on, going into self-employment and becoming a coach, counsellor, public speaker. And it feels a bit breakneck sometimes.
Right. So you're still doing your daily meditation to keep you grounded and calm amongst all this excitement.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very exciting. It is very exciting. Yeah, but I wouldn't be without those practices.
And do you write? Are you writing any of this down?
I've got some things sketched out. I've got bits and pieces written down. One day, yeah, I'd like to produce a book or something, if I can put it in the right sort of tone, put things in the right way. It's there. It's cooking, simmering.
And have you told your story before?
I have in bits and pieces. Some people know my story. I haven't told it in a big way yet. It's beginning to come out now.
Marvellous. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, Sian. Absolutely true inspiration. Really, really marvellous. Very happy for you.
Well, thank you, Elaine. It's been lovely to speak to you and your audience.
Thank you. And just before you go, we've got 2 song choices. Louis Armstrong, Wonderful World, which I think after hearing your story kind of speaks for itself. But why did you choose that song, Sian?
It's just so uplifting but gentle and joyful. And I mean, is there any better way to look at the world? Really, just appreciate the beautiful things that are around you. And it's on my playlist, my funeral playlist. That one.
Wonderful. And the other one is Jack Johnson, Better Together.
Yeah, I got a little obsessed with this when I wasn't very well. I found a video of a young man who'd found a baby hummingbird, and he fed it and looked after it, and I believe eventually released it. And it was set to this soundtrack, and when I was feeling low, it just lifted me up again, and I shared it with lots and lots of people. If ever I heard of anybody who was having a hard time, I'd send that to them, and I'd just watch it repeatedly for my own benefit as well. And it was just such a lovely thing, and the song has stuck with me. And when times are a bit low, I've lost the video now, I don't know where it is, but I still play it, and it reminds us that, as the Beatles said, love is all we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sian Podmore, and carrying on, keeping up the good work. And I look forward to reading your book one day.
Thank you, Elaine. It's been wonderful to speak to you.